Hello again. In the first video in this series, we looked at why you should correct learner error in class. But before we think about how to do this, let's take a minute to think about what it's useful to correct. I'm Jo Gakonga from elttraining.com, and if you like this, there are lots of other helpful video-based courses and resources on my site. Learners of English make mistakes, of course, but those errors don't always have the same cause. So let's think about the different root causes of those errors. The first one, of course, is just the level or ignorance. The obvious reason for an error is that the learner just hasn't learnt that vocabulary or that form yet. And of course, this is especially true at lower levels, but it can happen with, any level of learner. Here's an example. I can come later. So this learner hasn't yet learnt the phrase be able to, or they don't know that we can't have two modal verbs together. So they've done their best to express their meaning using the words that they do know. Now, you understand what they mean, it's not that difficult to pull apart, but you need to teach them how to say it. Another very obvious reason that learners make mistakes is that the language they already speak, their L1, is getting in the way. Now, this can be manifest in all sorts of ways. Pronunciation, of course, is a really huge aspect of this. Languages have different sounds and some just don't map onto each other. Mostly they don't map onto each other exactly. So different sounds can be a major source of error. And this also goes into intonation and word stress and sentence stress. All of those things often have different patterns too, and so that will affect the learner's L2, English in this case. Some grammatical forms exist in some languages, but not in others. So articles are a good example. English has them, and it has a plethora of rules of how you use them. But many languages do perfectly well without them. And so they're hard to remember to use if they're not in your first language. Between European languages in particular, there are lots of cognates like table in French, and this can be really helpful. But there are also some false friends, words that look the same but aren't. So if you know this word in Spanish, you might be expecting embarrassed to mean the same thing, but it doesn't. Another issue is word order. That's often different between languages, and that'll cause problems. The list of these reasons for error is really long. And if you teach learners from a particular language group, then of course it's a very good idea for you to know something about that language so that you can see the kind of difficulties that they're likely to have, the holes that they're likely to fall into because of their L1. Preferably, of course, you'd speak their first language yourself. Some error is caused because learners are experimenting with what they already know, but they're overgeneralizing. So I got on the car is incorrect, but it's a perfectly reasonable assumption given that I got on the bus is perfectly right. So a learner that says they builded a house next door to me is making a guess, perfectly reasonable guess, but it's incorrect guess that build has a regular past tense. It doesn't. Another reason that learners make error is just because they make mistakes. They know the language. If you prompt them, they could almost certainly self-correct, but they're trying to make meaning in real time. It's getting from their brain to their mouth in real time, and it's just difficult. It's hard to make that connection fast enough, and so error occurs. This happens with native speakers too, of course. Learners at all levels, right up to advanced, will do this. For example, leaving out the auxiliary do in questions, or that notorious third person S and the present simple. Why is this important to consider when we choose what to correct? Let's think about it. If the learner makes the error because they don't know that form yet, then it's not an error, they just don't know it. So the answer is teach it to them, or keep it in mind to teach in a future lesson at least. If they make the error because of L1 interference or because of overgeneralization, then it's very helpful to show them why they made that mistake. It's like this in your language, but in English it's like this. We do say on the bus, but it's in a car. And finally, if they've just slipped up, then a simple facial expression or a recast, how long do you play the guitar, will probably prompt them to self-correct. One final thought before the end of this, and I've already said that you can't and shouldn't try to correct everything. So how do you choose? I think that there are a few ways to prioritise this. If your target language is the simple past, then you should be correcting that. Second is errors which affect intelligibility. If you can't understand them, then they need to know, because other people won't understand them either. Third one is the frequency of the error. If they all make this error all of the time, then it's definitely something you should be correcting. And finally, the likelihood of success. It's best to save correction for language that they're ready for and at a time in the lesson when it's likely that they'll take it on board. So we've looked at the why and we've looked at the what of error correction. So now let's go on to think about how you're going to do it.